Hey everybody, sorry for the unusual start to this episode. We're back to the regularly scheduled programming in just 1 second. I'm just recording this because I started doing the editing here at the gym for the latest episode when I noticed a back and forth that the guys had while I stepped away just before recording this episode. And it explains a lot as to some of the things that happened later in the episode that I didn't really understand at the time. So I think I'm going to leave this in because hopefully it'll be funny. It may not be funny, but I figured I'd just leave it in and also hedge my bets by explaining it here. So again, apologies for the weird start, but hopefully you enjoy this episode, and hopefully this episode doesn't take me too long to edit. Thank you. Okay.
Okay,
so
140, right? Everyone good to go?
Yeah, actually, give me 1 second, guys. I'll be right back. Hold on. Be right back.
All right. So this is the auction episode, right?
Yes.
What do you want to make? Want to make a little bet right now?
Yeah.
All right. Mark is going to say Biblios how many times in the episode?
Well, yeah. If he does, I mean, this is the one that he's going to do it, right? I will say, how do you want to do this? If he's above my number, I win, and if he's below my number, you win?
No, you pick the number, I pick over under.
Okay, I'm going to say 7.
Ooh. That's right where I was thinking. I'm going to go with just under.
Okay, so yeah, if he hits that, I win. If it's under that, you win.
What do we win?
Ooh, your rarest Pokemon card.
What? So what are you giving me?
My rarest
your
Pokemon
hidden magic
card.
trick? Oh, okay.
All right, guys. You ready to go?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Definitely ready.
Hello and welcome to episode number 140 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. I am the host of this episode, the Green Tank, and with me as always are my co-hosts, Kellen the Red Tank.
Hello.
And Neelan the Orange Tank.
Hello.
I had hoped for my triumphant return that you would say the slogan of the show.
No, never. Not even for that. I'll use it as your eulogy.
Okay. Yeah. After you murder me.
Well, the less said about that, the better. So I'm a little peek behind the curtain to all our listeners. We, on this episode, as we are on every episode we record, we are going into this with no plan as to what we're going to be talking about. So I've come up with a way to figure out what we're going to be talking about on this episode. We are going to have an auction. Is it going to be about cooperative play? Anybody want cooperative play?
No, I grew out of cooperative play at the age of 3.
Oh, good.
No parallel play? Area control?
We've already done area control.
All right. So that was my bit about the fact that we were doing auctions.
That's a good bit.
We were auctioning off the topic.
What was the funny part?
I'll pay you 100 for that bit.
That's right. We're going to be talking about auctions on this episode.
We're talking all about them.
All about auctions. That is one way to classify what we're doing. We're going to be talking all about auctions, auction games, what we like about auction games, the great parts about them, the pitfalls of auction games, our favorite auction games. But before we talk about auctions...
a continuation of the episodes that we set up so very, very long ago.
Yes, this is the latest in our series on game.
Yeah, our frequently used mechanics.
Our follow-up to May 2018's episode.
Yeah.
How to Win Friends and Area Control People.
Some might say this has been gestating since that episode. So this is the birth of the auction episode. In the womb. From the womb to the tomb.
Plate.
No, that's where Kellen's going when I kill him. Anyhow... Before we talk about auctions and wombs and tombs, we'll talk about the games that we've been playing. Kellen's going to start us off with his discussion of Fleet, the dice game, the dice version of the popular card game Fleet. I'm going to be following that up with a talk about our game of Iwari, the deluxe edition, in fact. And then Neelan is going to be leading us into the auction part of our episode with a talk about the auction classic from the doctor himself, Modern Art. So... let's start the ball rolling with Kellen. Tell us about Fleet the Dice game.
I have been interested in Fleet the Dice game for a long time. Fleet the card game is sort of a cult classic, I would say. I would say it's not wildly popular, but it is very popular with people who sing its praises. Fleet the Dice game is a dice game version of Fleet that is actually coming back into print at the end of this year. So I tracked down a copy and paid too much money on the secondary market because I wanted to try this game. It is billed as a pretty decent weight roll and write game. So in Fleet the Dice game, you are going through a few different phases, rolling dice, collecting licenses for certain types of boats, and then making buildings in your harbor and on your wharf, and trying to score the most points, as you do in every board game that has happened in the last 10 years. The game is divided into two really distinct halves, or halves. And in one, you're rolling the boat dice, and in the other, you're rolling the town dice. What's interesting about the way that dice rolling works is you always roll in each phase one dice more than the number of players. And then you draft them, which I enjoy this already because there are many dice games where anyone can take any amount of the dice that they want, and it doesn't matter what your opponents take. In this, in a two-player game, let's say, which Christina and I played, if I take one die, Christina takes one die, and then we actually both get the die that is left over. And so in a three-player game, there's a lot of power in going both first, and there's a lot of power in going second, because you're choosing which bonus to get and which to give to everyone. What's fun about Fleet the Dice game is that you have to invest in certain different types of fish, and each one comes with licenses that have special powers, and you will not be able to get everything, and so you must specialize and choose. And so you might invest really heavily in shrimp, and what's cool about shrimp is that when you roll subsequent shrimp, you're going to be able to do any die value, any face for that shrimp die in the future. And so shrimp becomes a thing that gives you a lot of flexibility. On the other side of this chart, you've got oysters. Oysters, when a fishing phase happens, they actually catch multiple oysters instead of just one per fishing phase. You have boats at the bottom of this board, and each time a fishing phase happens, you just get another fish in all your boats. It's really satisfying to keep getting new boats, adding more fish to them. But what's interesting is on the other side of the board in the town phase, you've got a bunch of different ways to screw around with the rules, bend the rules to your will. There's a thing I particularly like. There's the harbor where you can get your own fishing phases that your opponent doesn't have access to. So if you invest pretty heavily in the harbor, you're actually fishing more often. At the end of the game, every fish you have is just worth points. There is a coin system, and this is where you sort of get the Ganshan Clevery combo nature of what's happening, where every 3 coins...
Counterinsurgency?
Yes, this is a counterinsurgency, just like Root, I think, is
Gotcha.
the number one counterinsurgency game that's ever been made. Actually, the original, from what I understand. And the coin chart is even done in an interesting way. It's not every 3 coins you get to fill in anywhere you want. It starts at 3, but then as you go, that becomes 4 and 5. Gets more and more expensive to get those wild wherever you want to go. This is interesting on the very face of it because you actually have to have literally 2 giant pieces of paper in order to play one round. And I'm showing them to you right now. It's like 2 full color sheets that make up your boards. It's like you're not screwing around when you're playing Fleet the Dice game. There is a lot going on here. I attempted to scan these or take a picture with my phone and try to play by forum where we were all like filling things in. It is way too much to attempt to do that. Christina and I really enjoyed our first play of Fleet the Dice game. It does not have as much of that satisfying combo as Ganshan Clever or Twice as Clever, which is sort of the pinnacle of this genre for me, but it does replace that with a lot of substantive interaction because you roll the dice and it does matter where they're going and who's getting to certain things first.
So you're saying that it doesn't have the level of comboing that the clever games do. Do you like it better than the clever games, or do you think the clever games are superior?
For me, I think the pinnacle of this is probably Ganshan Clever and Twice as Clever.
Okay.
For my money, this is substantially more complicated. There's a lot more going on.
Yeah.
This has that feeling of never getting to do everything that you want to do, and the game ends at the appropriate moment where it's like, man, I really just... I wanted to do more in that boat and by the time you get halfway through the game, you're like, well, I guess I'm a shrimp fisherman. I'm not getting any cod. It's just not happening for me this game. And that's fun. And the different licenses have levels to them. So you might become a level 1 shrimp fisherman, but then, on the swordfish or the lobster, you're going to go to level 2 or level 3, and those powers just replace the other powers. And so I like that. I like that feeling at the end of the game of going, I'm going to start over and try a completely different thing and have fun with it.
Okay.
It's really good. I'm very eager to see the updates that they make to the version coming out this year. I know the rule book is apparently really bad. I didn't find it that bad, but that's basically the things you see online about this game are, wow, it's hard to find, and 2, wow, the rulebook is bad.
Interesting.
Mark and I played Fleets together a while ago, and I remember liking the game a lot. So I'm intrigued as someone that likes roll and writes, and you saying that this is one of the better ones in that genre. I'm sure I will enjoy this a fair bit. Yeah, I'm eager to try this with you at some point.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that I do not really like roll and
Right,
writes.
well, exactly. That's kind of why I'm intrigued. Like, as someone that doesn't like the genre, especially, saying that you dig this one is cool.
Yeah, I remember listener Nate teaching us
Yes.
that game at Strategicon, in fact. And I remember really liking it. I remember how tight the card game was. But obviously, roll and writes has been one of the more popular mechanics in the last couple of years. And it seems like the level that's trying to be unlocked next in the roll and write genre is that like more complicated roll and write.
Yep.
And I know, what was it? Welcome to Dino World?
Welcome to Dino World was one I just moved by David Turtzi, and I actually have David Turtzi's next interactive roll and write called Roam and Roll, which is, again, a roll and write game on a board with a lot of interaction, a bit heavier. Right. So it does feel like this is becoming a lot more prevalent.
And you found Dino World to be a pass, right?
I found Dino World to be fine. Like, I don't think it was bad. I don't think it was great. I don't think it justifies its rule set.
I'm just very curious to see if this level, this medium to heavy roll and write, is a thing that can survive. It sounds like Fleet, the dice game, is at least a good player into that sort of arena.
Yeah, I think I just want to go on the record as saying like a medium weight roll and write game sounds like garbage, and I don't support and don't think anyone should be wasting development time trying to make a game like that. And I feel like roll and write is where you dump. There's one interesting decision in the game, and then you make a game where no one interacts with anyone, and there's a mildly pleasant game experience. That is not Fleet the Dice game. Fleet the Dice game is not complicated in the strategic sense. There's a lot going on for 2 sheets of paper in front of you. If this game were 2 hours long, it would have been the worst thing I have ever played, and I would be screaming in pain. But, it's under an hour. You're having a good time. You're building a little empire, and it feels like there's a bunch of powers that could go off in different ways each game. And the primary mechanism for choosing dice is interesting to me and feels novel. I'm sure it's somewhere else, but when I read the rules, I went, wow, this has more interaction built into the main way you choose dice than almost all other games like this that I've played.
One last question. You think that this game doesn't really even necessarily hit the medium weight? It's just skirting up along it?
That's so relative.
Yeah,
man.
of course. Yeah.
But it is the most complicated roll and write game I have played.
Gotcha. Okay. Sounds interesting. Definitely have piqued my interest because I am very curious about this like next level roll and write. Even if this is not a full next level, like at least a step up, and 2 sheets of roll and write is enough to get me interested, as the saying goes.
It's next level in that way.
That's right.
That's on the front of the box. Not 1 scoring sheet, but 2
that's right.
sheets that you have to laminate because you're neurotic and replace them with dry erase markers. That is Fleet the Dice game. If that sounds interesting, I know a new version is coming out, I believe, by the end of 2020. I'm eager to hear what that changes. I hope not too much, designers, because I have this one.
Speaking of new versions coming out, we played the latest iteration of the Web of Power /Han/China game. This one is called Iwari. We played Kellen's nice deluxe version of Iwari. And I guess we'll start there. This deluxe version is gorgeous. The pieces are beautiful. There is the issue that the yellow player pieces and the orange player pieces are almost indiscernible.
So odd. It seems like picking 2 colors that are that similar when you're already at 5 colors total is bizarre.
The artwork is beautiful on the cards, if quite inconsequential, because basically there's all this art, but it just comes down to the color of the card. But the game itself is one that I've been wanting to play for a long, long time, ever since I heard way back in the day about Web of Power. In Iwari, what you're doing is you're going to have a hand of 3 cards. Again, they are different colors, and you're going to use those cards to place either tents or totems on the board, and you're going to place those tents and totems in spaces corresponding to the colors that you play on your turn. Tents are sort of an area control / longest route scoring. So when you're placing tents in a region, and again, the regions are separated by colors, at the end of the halfway point of the game and at the end of the game, you are going to score for area control in each region. And it's got a sort of an interesting area control scoring as far as the tents go. So say there's a region that has 6 spots, and I have 3 of the tents, and Kellen has 2 of the tents, and Nealon has 1 of the tents. The first place player gets the total number of tents that they control in the region. So in that case, there are 6 total tents. I have the most. I get 6 points. The second place player gets the number of points equal to the first player's number of tents. So Kel, in this case, for his 2 tents, gets 3 points, and Nealon, for his 1 tent, gets 2 points. So it's sort of like you're getting the number of points equal to the number of tents the player above you in scoring has placed. So that leads to sort of interesting plays where if somebody's gone hard in tents and you know you're not going to win it, you can place a single tent and maybe score a bunch of points that way. I found that a sort of interesting aspect to the scoring and to the considerations. And then, as I said, the other scoring for tents is longest path. So you're trying to get one uninterrupted network of tents. That is interesting because there's plenty of opportunity to cut players off. The network, at least in the map we played, and I should mention that in the deluxe version, there's something like 8 maps with a bunch of variations you can play. But in our map, which was the vanilla map, there was plenty of chances to cut players off. Although it is branching, there were sort of bottlenecks where players could get cut off. And I found that interesting. I'm always up for a game where you can sort of play aggressively and cut folks off. So that is a cool scoring aspect. And so that sort of covers how the tents score. The other aspect is the totems. Every region, you can place totems. The way you score totems is that at the end of the game, so tents score at the halfway point and at the end. Totems only score at the end, but they're sort of like a chance for big points. If you are in the majority or tied for the majority of a region, and you have the majority or tied for the majority in an adjacent region, you will score points for every totem in the region. So, for example, if one region has 4 totems and I had the most in it, and another region had 3 totems and I had the majority there, I would score 7 points, which is a lot of points in this game. I think we ended on something like 45 points. So totems are a chance to score a lot of points in one fell swoop at the end, but when you commit to this totem strategy, you're sort of like, no, you're going to be battling for it in all likelihood. For all the rules explanation, it's a very clean game. I've heard it compared to, and I don't think it's at all a one-for-one comparison, but it has the same clip in some ways as Ethnos, where it's like draw a card or 2, play a card or 2, and it goes around. There's more, I think, consideration per turn. I think Iwari is a deeper game than Ethnos, but there is a nice sort of like pace to it, I think, for a game of this weight in terms of like decision making. Not weight in terms of rules grit, but it's a game where I think there's a lot of decisions to be made, but it does wrap up fairly quickly. For a game as substantial as this, we got it done in about an hour.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
under an hour for 4 people.
What did you guys think of Iwari?
I liked it a lot. I think that the thing that you're suggesting there, the idea of having a very simple rule set, but having a lot of considerations, especially in the context of lots of different area control considerations, right? Especially to some extent, the two competing considerations of tents versus totems. I think the thing that makes this the most interesting is when you enter a territory for the first time, you are able to only play 1 tent and that's your turn. So you have to invest to enter a new territory, which allows someone to capitalize on that. So there's a lot of interesting decisions on whether the right time to push into a territory is. If you are sure you're able to follow that up with the right amount of tents, the appropriate number of totems, do you go big into tents? Do you go big into totems, which is only going to pay off right at the end of the game? There are enough different scoring considerations for a game that is very clean and quick. I like that a whole lot.
I was actually surprised at just how short this was and how airy it felt. The final scoring was complicated, and because you're scoring totems by connecting regions, it's not just like, oh, I have the most totems there, I'm guaranteed to get some points. It's, no, I have the most totems there, and now I have to evaluate how all the ties work and all the totem regions surrounding that area. It definitely ended before I wanted it to, and I want to try it again. And this version that I have, this deluxe version, has, I think, 8 different maps to play on. I think there's almost 2 sides to this discussion, which is the core game design, which I think is awesome, and I'm very excited to keep playing it, and I think we could bust it out and have it as the starter game for a couple of weeks and fulfill not a filler game, but getting more out of it in still under an hour. But then there's also the production discussion, which I don't know how I feel. I think that they went big on some really cool, interesting things. The totems look beautiful, and they look different from each other. But then putting the totems away, they're different sizes, and so they only fit in specific slots in the insert. And it's like annoying as hell to figure out where to put them. And then the color problems, and the tents themselves are beautiful, and they're wood, and they've got ink printed on them, kind of like the root meeples, which I think is awesome, but they're small as hell, and the colors don't particularly match. So it's sort of like this, we went big, we went Kickstarter, and like, but for what? man, and I'm happy to have it, but I feel like either they should have really gone for it or scaled it back, because I don't know what versions and variants and feats and what do to include. But at least if they screwed up any player color, it was the orange and the yellow, because anyone who plays as orange and yellow is probably a loser who has no friends.
It's a big time callback to last week's episode. We have both the issue with the inserts and the issue with the exploration.
I was going to say, Kellen sounds like he would have been in my corner on the bad inserts discussion there.
But it's just like I sat for like more than a minute trying to jam pieces, and there was no demarcation, right? There's also 8 maps and no demarcation of which map is which, and the rulebook's like, oh, play New Horizon. And it's like, the hell does that mean? This is a very solid core system. Very interesting. I'm extremely excited to have any area control game that finishes in that length of time.
Yeah.
But actually, guys, I just wanted to point out that it could also be that the Totem game is actually an auction game in disguise. Maybe you didn't think about that. But if you think about it, it's actually just a multivariate auction game happening across the whole board. Did you think about that, guys?
It is interesting.
You hadn't thought about that.
Now that you mentioned it, almost is like if it's every area control game could be described in that way. Yeah, actually quite interesting.
Think about that. Yeah, your time is an auction game, and you choose where to spend it. Actually.
Exactly.
What if our lives are auctions? Nothing but auctions.
That's what I got to say about Iwari.
So that is Iwari by Thundergriff Games.
So,
Neelan,
into what is actually an auction game, I'm going to be talking about modern art.
That's a hand management game.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually secretly mostly about hand management. We have been wanting to do this episode and play modern art and talk about it for so long, and then we finally did. The premise of the game is that you are auctioning off different pieces of art in a bunch of different ways. There are 5 different suits of card representing art from different artists. Everyone is dealt a hand at the start of the game of roughly 10 cards, and that's going to be a mix of these different artists in your hand, and every card is also going to have a type of auction printed in the corner. So that could be a once around auction where everyone bids once, a auction that is just a regular style open auction, going once, going twice, that sort of thing, a closed auction where you all bid secretly, or a name your price auction where the auctioneer specifies a price and then you go around in a circle and everyone either gets a chance to buy that piece of art from the auctioneer for that price, or the auctioneer can, if no one else wants it, pay that price to the bank. The main thing that links all these auctions together is this idea that as the auctioneer, you're either getting paid by another player or you're sending money out of the game. The reason you are buying these pieces of art is at the end of the round, which is signified by 5 pieces by the same artist appearing on the table. When that happens, the round ends, and whichever artist has the most sold art across all players is going to be valued the most, followed by second, followed by third, and then the other 2 artists, their stuff is worth nothing. That's how it works in, let's say, round 1. You'll immediately sell off your art for its value accordingly, get more money, and go into rounds 2, then 3, then 4. Where this gets super interesting is the ways that the prices can accumulate in rounds 2, 3, or 4 could end up with, by the end of the game, one artist being worth 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, and then that's a lot of money in the context of this game. Or at any point, if that artist fails to sell for the round, it just busts completely and is worth nothing for the round. So there's always this risk of wanting an artist to sell well so that they're hot and they're worth a lot of money for that round. But if you push too hard into buying a specific artist because they were worth a lot previously and then they stop selling, then suddenly you're out of luck and your paintings sell for nothing. This is what happened to me. In our game of modern art, I went all hard on one specific artist and was punished for it at the end, where they just completely failed to produce anything significant. I bought them at their peak. It was a good run while I had it, and then they just went completely out of fashion.
That's not the way you play the art game.
That is apparently not the way you play the art game. I really enjoyed this. I think it's almost trite to say that a Reiner Knizia game is good at this point, but it is so profoundly good for how simple it is. I've almost entirely explained all of the rules to it. It is just a series of auctions with the auctioneer rotating. And that alone is interesting because the consideration of whether I am going to be receiving money from another player or just sending money to the bank is so vital, especially as you get towards the end of the game. God, it's good. What do you guys think of modern art?
I absolutely love Modern Art. This is part of the Knizia Auction Trilogy. I have 2 of his Auction Trilogy, Modern Art and Raw, in my top 50, with Modern Art pipping Raw by a couple spots. Third one being Medici, which is also a great game, but not one of my favorites. I absolutely love Modern Art. Listener Chase in our Discord has mentioned the idea of thematic abstract games. He was talking about another Knizia game, Tigris and Euphrates. We had a discussion on the Discord about whether that game is thematic or abstract or where it lies on the spectrum. For me, Modern Art would be my example of a thematic abstract, where I like the idea that an artist can be hot one round, and then if he's out of fashion next round, his stuff is worth nothing. But then in the following round, if he's hot again, his prior work lifts up his price. So it works for me on a thematic level.
Exactly.
I think it's very interesting.
Totally. And that was becoming like evident even as I was speaking about it. I was like, oh, right, this is actually really good, because that's to some extent how it works in the art world. One of the things I have not mentioned is that there is this very cool element also of hand management in this, where you're accumulating cards. You have a lot at the start. You get a few more in rounds 2 and 3. In round 4, you don't get any new cards, and you're just playing with the cards you have, and finding the right time to end the round is a big part of this, and finding when to add cards to the table's sort of tableau in order to adjust the value of pieces is critical. So it's a solid hand management game on top of being just an excellent auction game.
It's a great auction game. It's not the best auction game, as we know that would go to Biblios, but it is, I think, unassailable as an auction game.
It surprised me. Before playing it, I had thought that, Paula Deming, the Orchid Tank, had mentioned this as one of her favorite gaming memories way, way back in the day, and had always wanted to play it. And I assumed that the fun was, oh my God, there's 27 different types of auctions, and like each time it's a different thing to think about. But that's not the fun part of the game. The fun part of the game is seeing how many of a color are out and then jostling for the ones that you want to score for that round. I think it has a good tempo and flow because you must turn in all of your stamps, and then that's converted to money at the end of each round, of which there are 4 rounds. And so even though you don't get 3/4 of the way through the game and think, oh, I'm out, Mark's got 17 green and there's no way to catch up, that's all been converted to money. And so you're sitting there going, who has the most money right now? Like, I think Neelan is sitting on a bag of cash, but you don't really know because so many auctions have happened and money is wheeling and dealing. It doesn't feel as punitive as some other auction games we may mention in the episode proper or in the main feature topic. I think you take an auction game like the Estates and you can actually just run out of money and get got. And Modern Art feels as tense in certain moments, but it doesn't ever feel like, oh, I can't do anything because I have no money and this isn't fun anymore. It still feels like you're controlling and participating, because even bringing out a color of a card, even though you're not going to win that card, has significant impact on how it scores. I think this is very, very, very good.
And that leads to the idea that you can try to excel in 2 ways. You can be a speculator. You can see like, oh, green is making a run, or this artist is making a run. I need to get on, or maybe I need to hold off, and maybe I want to hold some of the cards to try to win them later. But you can also win as, instead of being a speculator, being the auctioneer, like knowing where the market is hot and just selling the art in your hand. Instead of being a buyer of the art, you can sell the art.
This is an interesting anecdote for Mark to bring up because it's how you won the game.
Well, I didn't want to mention it, but...
oh, yeah, you didn't want to mention it.
I'm just trying to illuminate the game to our listeners.
Yeah, it's multifaceted.
That's right.
Here's how I won the game.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's great. I mean, it's the same sort of thing with Estates. You mentioned the Estates. Estates has the idea of...
Neuheimat.
Hipster. You can make your money when you're the auctioneer. That's a chance you have to make your money. Estates is much tougher in that respect because it's a closed economy and money is only leaving the system. It's never entering, whereas you have that give with Modern Art. But yeah, great game.
Actually, I did think that this game, different from other games, would make an amazing Pokemon retheme using the trading card game as the basis. So you got a lot of holographics, a lot of different colors, and people would really get invested in getting that Charizard card versus the art. They're like, who cares about art?
So would they be, instead of 5 artists, they'd be like 5 types of Pokemon?
Yeah, it would be like the electric
lightning
collection.
Pokemon.
That's
and
right.
like electronic Pokemon.
Fire.
And like
No.
Yeah.
Stop
bird
talking.
Pokemon.
Can you name 3 Pokemon?
Slime Pokemon.
Pikachu.
Okay, 1.
Charizard.
2, but I already said that. Doesn't count.
Bulbasaur. He's one.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, he's 1. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Did it.
That's 3. Count
2
it.
and Charizard.
Count it.
Okay. We'll count that.
I just wanted to say that one of the things I especially liked about this as well is, in comparison to a game like The Estate, which I like a lot as well, I think that the rules get out of their way a little bit more in modern art and lets the players dictate what the game is to some extent, the price that things are going for, what is going high, what's going low, and when it's happening. It just feels a lot more like a vehicle for fun interactions and fun high points. I really enjoyed modern art by various publishers and designed by Reiner Knizia.
And we played this on Tabletop Simulator, and I will say it probably came the closest to feeling like playing a game in real life without playing it in real life. And I think it would only be increased the enjoyment in real life as we screamed at each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Though I did go on mute a few times and make deals with Christina.
It's been a little while, but we're going to put another call out for reviews. If you like what you hear, go ahead and go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you found us and leave a review. Why don't you? Here's one from Necroskeptic. That's an interesting username. Necroskeptic, sort of death, skeptic of death sort of thing.
Unclear about death.
Yeah, clear about death, as we all are, if you think about it. This show has become one of my favorites. Favorites is spelled with a U, so that's a nod to Nealon, I think. It has a good mix of critique and discussion, and the viewpoints of the hosts are divergent enough that it makes for very interesting conversations. The interplay between the hosts is genuinely funny. Genuinely is not in quotes, as you might have guessed. But
well, that was a nod to me, right?
If it had been in quotes, it would have been a nod to you. But it is. It seems like it was a legitimate feeling. I only recently discovered the podcast and have quickly gone through their back catalog. Catalog also spelled with a U in a weird place. Personal highlights for me were the discussion about what Dr. Reiner Knizia, very on topic for today's episode, is a doctor of.
Oceanography.
And the what's that?
Oceanography, if I remember correctly.
Oh, I thought you said pornography.
That's not what I
Wait, is it actually oceanography?
No, I think that was when the joke came up, I think.
I thought it was game design.
He's likely going to be closer to game design than oceanography, but who could say? That's another one.
He's actually just a medical doctor.
And the KFC analogy. What is the KFC analogy? I don't even remember that. I know that Kellen lives near KFC, but I don't know what the KFC analogy was. Whether you are new to board games or a seasoned campaigner, I'd recommend Board Game Barrage. Thank you so much, Necroskeptic. So why don't you follow the Questioner of Death and leave your own review. Apple Podcasts or wherever you found us. That is a great way.
Mark's being very glib, but it is one of the best ways that you can support or help the podcast.
Literally my next sentence. That was literally my next sentence.
No, I didn't hear it. I did actually hear it at the back of my...
You're away for 1 week, and you think you can usurp...
You're going to cut out that part, though, about where you're saying it underneath me. Yeah.
Plenty of cuts going to happen in this episode.
That'll confuse people, probably. We don't want to do that.
So let's get into our feature topic, auction games. Again, the latest feature in our mechanic series.
In our ongoing series.
Yep. In our ongoing, much ballyhooed series. So very generally speaking, auction games, I think, like hand management games, like pretty much any mechanic that you want to discuss in board games, has a lot of flavors, has a lot of ways it's implemented. But I think as just a general baseline, auction games are what's sort of on the tin. It's like a game where you are bidding for something. There's the most sort of straightforward is where you're bidding for a resource or bidding for a card or bidding for something like that. But there's also more abstract ways to bid. Kellen sort of hinted at the idea that Iwari, the totem strategy, might be considered an auction. There's a lot of different ways to think about auction games, but I think it's pretty clear when a game has an auction component. I think it's pretty easy to identify that. Now that we've sort of described the bones of what an auction game is, what are things that auction games offer that you don't find in other games? What can auction games give you that other games don't?
I think for me, the one major benefit of auction games is it feels like a somewhat less direct form of competition. Because you are always obviously outbidding maybe someone or around the table, but it's not as intense as like, I'm doing this to hurt Mark, right? There is an evaluation of whether something is worth more to me than whether it's worth more to Mark, but it's a good way to add feistiness to a game without it feeling like I'm just coming at Kellen for a specific thing, or I'm coming at Mark for a specific thing. It lends itself like very tense, very high moments that are not, I'm going to play my card and Mark takes 2 damage. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. It lends itself to interaction, unquestionably, but it is this sort of like not mono a mono, not directly, you're not hurting something.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
I think that it's important to talk about auction games or auction systems because there are a lot of different types. And I think one of my biggest pet peeves of all time is game balance by auction, which is where it's like, well, we can't really evaluate how strong these powers are. So what we're going to do at the beginning of the game is you're all going to bid victory points. And whoever bids the most victory points, you get the most overpowered power. I think that auctions can be used as a very lazy way to quote unquote balance a system. That is like it at its worst.
Yeah.
I think that auction games are challenging for new players because if everyone is not new to a game, the relative value of things is way, way, way more apparent to veteran players, and returning new players will frequently overbid and they'll have turns where they feel really, really dumb. Where they just triple or quadruple, the next bid. Even in our game of Modern Art that we just had, there were turns where we did blind bids and then they were revealed and someone had bid literally double what the next person had bid, just meaning they overpaid. They did something stupid. Auctions are not my favorite mechanism when they're injected as like one part of the game. I think Archipelago is one of my favorite games of all time, and it uses an auction system to divvy up the power cards that you get, some of the differentiation for what your people can do. It's probably my least favorite system in all of Archipelago. I do love one specific facet of that system of auctions, which is that it's a punitive auction, meaning that everyone loses what they bid blindly. I think that the most Care Bear auction system you can have is like a blind bid, but if you don't win, you get it back. At least in Archipelago, it's a blind bid, and if you bid 6 and someone bid 7, you get got. You lose all 6 of your coins. I enjoy that, but even still, I feel like it's this way in Archipelago to divvy up the cards, and I would prefer a different system to be there as opposed to that. On the other side of that, you have a game like Modern Art, you have a game like High Society where...
Biblios.
Yeah, sure. Where the game, or a game like For Sale, where the game is an auction. That is the primary mechanism of the game, is relatively evaluating different sets of cards for hand management. And I think that is where I enjoy auctions the most. I think For Sale is perhaps, the greatest filler game that features auctions predominantly. And I love sort of the 2 rounds that you have in For Sale. There's the first half and the second half that are both different type of auctions, depending on how you look at it. It is by far the best, most premier auction game filler length.
How dare you mention a 2-phase game with an auction component and consider it the best? Now, I love auctions for, as Neelan mentioned, for the interaction that it forces. Like, if a game has an auction mechanic, most likely you're guaranteed to have some interaction, even if it's just in that aspect of the game. Like, an auction is, by its very nature, a confrontation. And I like that turning up the stakes that an auction game lends. And I'm going to mention it because I have to. Biblios, 2-phase game. And I love how it ratchets it up the tension in Biblios, because in the first phase, you are building up your hand. It's like you're building to a crescendo that is then released in the second phase, which is the auction phase. So you're trying to set yourself up in the first phase. You're trying to pick up the right cards and position yourself well. And then when that second phase rolls around, where it's like the do or die auction phase, where you are going to be figuring out where you stack up based on how well you do in the auction, that's where Biblios sort of like ratchets it up. So you have that build up in the first phase, and then the auction is like the crescendo of like the butting of the heads. I just love that aspect of it. It's like a perfect 2-phase, that rise and then boom.
It's interesting because like I think maybe counter to what Kellen was saying, like I generally like it, and to be fair, when it's used well, I think an auction integrated into a game that is otherwise not strictly an auction game, I actually think sometimes it elevates those games a lot more.
Like what?
The example I sort of had was, so Watson and Holmes, for example, is the only degree of like real interaction in this is this bidding over these locations you're going to, which is like a small little auction of like, okay, I'm willing to go here. Is anyone, it is literally an auction over how many carriage tokens you're going to spend to go there. It forces the competition into a game where you're valuing information a little bit. Like if you think that information is at this location, then you'll be hired to go there. And part of the game is a little bit of bluffing up the value of those locations by pretending they perhaps contain stuff that other people haven't seen yet. I think another good example for me is Through the Ages. Now, Through the Ages has a actual direct conflict in the form of battles and wars, but the other form of competition in that game is bidding on colonies. And what's interesting in the case of Through the Ages is you're bidding your military power. So you're actually bidding your ability to compete in the more direct competition by spending your power on the indirect competition. So it feeds into another system, but it is very much just one small component of a much larger game, where I think that it's just right, because colonies are, when they come up, are too valuable not to bid power on. So it's a substantive portion of that game while not being a massive chunk of it.
I haven't played Through the Ages enough to fight you back. I think a counterexample for me is Power Grid, where the auction is the game, and then there's a lot of other systems that happen, and every time I get to the auction part of Power Grid, I'm super stoked and excited, and then everything that surrounds it, I think the game is won and lost largely in that auction, and I'm sure someone who loves Power Grid and has played it thousands of times will at me and say that I'm wrong, but I find that it is either the game or it's not. You know, like if you have an auction where someone screws up in a major way, then they're out of the game. And so if in Through the Ages someone overbid to the tune of astronomical loss, are they now out of the main game? And if so,
yeah, I would say that's actually a very good example of exactly that. Like, if you overspend on a colony, you could be punished by just being trounced by every successive player after that coming at you. I will say that, at least in the case of Watson and Holmes, the value of where you're going is a little bit loosier-goosier, so it kind of works in that context more. I would say it certainly works better in Through the Ages at higher level play.
Kellen has sort of hinted at this, but what are the sort of ways that auction games can go badly? He's mentioned the fact that a new player is usually at quite a disadvantage because they're not sure where to bid, and depending on the type of auction game, that can really, really hurt a new player. What other ways do you think auction games are vulnerable?
I think they're especially bad, or depending on the type of auction, right? And there's like 27 million kinds, and we can classify all of them. And this is not a negative for me, but I think it is a negative for many people. One of my favorite auction mechanisms is in Santiago, which is sort of one of those classic Euro area control games. And what's interesting about Santiago is that, and I'm sure I'm saying Santiago wrong, but Neelan says Hav, so I think they'll be okay with it, is that when you bid, you must make a unique bid. So if I bid 1, Mark can't bid 1, but everyone only gets to bid once, and then you choose the resources in order of your bid. So if you pass, you're going to get to go last. But if I bid 2, Mark bids 3, Neelan doesn't want to spend 4. It's not worth it, so he has to pass. So that once around, the turn order is so important. And so people who are very sensitive to turn order having an effect on their game will very often not like auctions, unless it's the loosest auction system available, which is like shout and you get it. Right. I love that. I think that it elevates a game if it works appropriately. I think, for example, modern art is one that there are so many auctions and the turn order is happening so often that no one ever feels especially got by the turn order, but you can. And Neelan, at the end of our game of modern art, the turn order was very, very important to how the end of the game played out.
So let's talk about some of our favorite auction games and why we like them so much. I'm going to piggyback off of Kellen's Santiago, where you're sort of bidding all the time for resources, with another game where you're bidding for everything. This is a game that Kellen introduced me to, but Traders of Genoa is a game that I played for the first time fairly recently, and I absolutely love just for the fact that everything's up for bid and everything's up for sale. This is a game where when you're in control of the pawn that is moving around the board, you can basically auction off the right to control where the pawn moves next. And so it's just a game where everything is up for grabs. I just love that about Genoa.
I love Genoa.
Yeah.
And think that the world is rife for a 1-hour version of Genoa.
Right.
If someone could design Genoa in 1 hour, I will shout the praises in your Kickstarter promotional video. I'll come on. I'll lend my likeness to any character in the game, and it can be tank themed. Love Genoa. Love Traders of Genoa. A game that we have not talked about on the podcast yet, but I want to do so. What does that mean? That I want to talk about it?
No, that you tend to talk about it. So not.
So I don't want to talk about it, but I do want to talk about it here right now, and that is Square on Sale. This is a Japanese auction game that is fascinating. I am so excited to play this again, and we've only got to play it the one time, but what happens is you are playing a little bit of an area control game and bidding on spaces with how much money you think a space is worth to put your chips on, and then you put a stack of sort of time markers on top of your stack of money, and then if it gets back to your turn, you take one of those off, and then if it gets back to your turn again, you've won that auction. Except anyone can come in and swoop you if they bid higher and replace their stack of chips from your stack of chips, and that time marker does not go back up to the full time. So it's basically a series of auctions that are happening around you, but the timers are all going down, and you have to decide like what it's worth. So not only are you bidding money in these auctions, that action is so important because they're literally all going on around you. I think this is so cool, so unique and interesting, beautifully designed. Square on Sale is a game that I would not be surprised to see it in my top 50 at the end of the year. I'm just hoping that we get a chance to play it again before the year ends.
My pick for my favorite auction game is Taj Mahal. I think what I love about Taj Mahal is that when the game starts, you see all of the auctions laid out before you. You see every allotment and the order that they're all going to execute in. So there are, one of the things that can be somewhat unknowable about an auction game is whether a thing will come out, what point it will. Taj Mahal sort of takes that away by showing you literally the map of auctions that will make up the whole game and the order that will happen in. And you're bidding multiple auctions at the same time. So you might be bidding on the placement of a palace or the acquiring of a noble or one of these set collection cards that you're trying to acquire. And you spend the cards you have in your hand to gain them, as well as gaining new cards at the end of the round, depending on when you finish out. It just has a really, really intense phase of you desperately hoping to get the one thing that you're going for, realizing you're out of the bid, having to maybe pivot to something or coming away with nothing. And then it just repeats that for the rest of the game. I think it's the highs and lows of knowing what you want to get at a certain point in the game and knowing when it's going to come, and then the devastation of maybe not being able to get it, even though you've been building up towards that point and having to be able to pivot from that. Taj Mahal is fantastic.
Let's fight a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's fight a bit. I love Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal is in my top 50 games. It's definitely an auction game. And I've kind of alluded to this for the last, hour, that actually like every game is an auction game.
Well, yeah, that's the running joke, right? Is that you can distill every game into effectively being a series of auctions.
It's like Keyflower, right? It's an auction game if you think about it, with 3 different resources.
I think Keyflower is quite deliberately an auction game.
Well, and let's keep going. Condottiere, right, is like an area control game, but actually it's an auction game. All worker placement games are actually auction games where there's just 17 different auctions.
El Grande.
Or in the case of A Feast for Odin, 50 different auctions, but you're bidding, 1 or 2 resources, and the first person to get there wins that auction. So I think there are things that feel like auction games to me, and even though there are games that are sure they are auction games, I love Taj Mahal, and I understand that it's an auction game, but when I'm playing it, it doesn't always feel that way to me, because it's more like, do I have the right hand? It's like poker-like, and because there's so many different colors and different things that are happening, it doesn't feel like an auction game where I'm thinking, how much money can I possibly bid on this? It's more like, what can I do with my hand to make things happen right now?
I would agree if which cards you keep in your hand were not a major component of the game, right? Because that is, to me, the defining point of what an auction is am I going to spend it here, or do I think that this money, this hand, these cards are more valuable down the line? Like, to me, that's the key decision of what an auction is it worth it now, or will it be worth more later if I hang on to my resources? And in this case, the resources are cards.
Is Skull more or less of an auction game than Taj Mahal?
Is Skull more or less of an auction game than Taj Mahal?
Or Biblios, for that matter.
Wait, what is Biblios?
Oh my god.
I checked out because you're droning on and on. No, what was the question?
It is,
like, what's the distinction between Taj Mahal and a game where you go around in a circle? Like, remember Masterpiece as a kid? Did you play Masterpiece?
Yeah, right.
Where you got the art and everyone's like bidding money up and up and up, and then it's a forgery and everyone goes, ah. Like, Taj Mahal is like fundamentally different than that because there's 6 different auctions happening each round, and the hand that you start with determines what you can even participate in. Ergo, the game isn't just an auction of how much am I willing to spend on this. It's a hand management game laced with 6 different auctions happening at once. So actually, it's not an auction game.
I feel like describing a game that is 6 different auctions happening at once as not an auction game is absurd to me. But like, I mean, like Skull, I kind of understand what you're saying, but Skull is like a press your luck. Like, I'm going to say a press your luck bidding game. Does that make it an auction game just because I said the word bidding? I don't know. I think where this gets bizarre is that, like you said, like you can define every game as what am I willing to risk for what am I willing to gain, right? And what am I willing to risk relative to other people makes that an auction. And sure, that works. And if we agree that that's true, then every game is on the spectrum from slightly an auction to definitely an auction. And I feel like Taj Mahal is definitely an auction camp.
This is an important spectrum to evaluate all games.
Right, exactly.
Like how heavy is this game? How long is this game? And on a spectrum of what was it? The spectrum was kind of an auction game to definitely an auction game. That's important.
And we'll be clarifying that for all future games.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start with the
Yeah, Mark, tell us which game do you think, out of interest, is definitely an auction game?
I'm going to be talking about 2 definitely in auction games because this is a type of auction game that I really, really enjoy, which is, auction games, as we mentioned, can introduce some conflict, but these auction games are all about the conflict, in my opinion. Again, not head-to-head conflict, but these are just really brutal auction games, and I wouldn't want to play this game over and over and over again, but every once in a while, I need a very brutal auction game. 2 of my favorites are The Estate, which is one of my top 10 games, and Container. These are closed economy games, which makes it even more brutal because you know that nothing is coming in, and every auction just feels make or break. I mean, I think my heart has raced more in The Estates than most other games that I've ever played, just because you know that, every dollar that I'm giving up, there's no more money coming in. If I'm giving it to Callan, he's going to get it. And like the swings of power in The Estates based on who has the money is just so tangible and so visceral that I love games like that. And Container is the same way. Container is a little more mechanical and a little more abstracted to see, because with The Estates, everybody just has a stack of money and you're just comparing stacks, and you can tell where the power has shifted at the table just based on the stack size. Container has more things going on. There's a scoring at the end, so you're not ever sure where anybody is. But both those games, again, just closed economy games, not something you could have like a steady diet of, but every once in a while, just a really powerful game experience, in my opinion.
I think the hard thing here, right, is that so many games have auctions in them that it feels like we could talk for another hour and we're still going to get an angry email about why the hell didn't you bring up Ra, the best game by the only true and living doctor.
Ra is a great auction game.
Ra is a great auction game. Like, and Keyflower is in my top 50, is one of my favorite games ever. Yes, it's an auction game. It's El Grande.
Yeah. This is a hand management thing. This is the hand management argument. Like,
is every game game. Yeah, because I'm frankly surprised, and I maybe understand why now, but I'm surprised you haven't mentioned No Thanks yet. Like, to me, that's straight up an auction game.
Yeah, that is a
That's a push your luck game, bro. Didn't you hear what that person said about Skull earlier in the episode, you idiot? No Thanks is a reverse auction, right? Which is different than a traditional auction.
Where's that on your spectrum, Nealon?
Still definitely an auction game. It's like you start in the middle with not an auction, and there are 2 ends. Definitely an auction, and then definitely a reverse auction in the other direction.
I think No Thanks is a great example of something that feels very much like an auction game, where it's sort of like, are you going to keep participating? Are you going to keep, I bust? We've talked a lot about QE and High Society, which are both auction games that have a very clever bit, which is that if you bid the most, you cannot win the game, even if you come out with the most points. I've turned my back on QE a little bit because I think that High Society is better and also made by the Doctor, so I choose the Doctor when I have to choose. But QE also has, it's an auction game where you can bid anything you want, man, and then like that's interesting and different. It's tough when so many things utilize bidding to properly, wrap on this topic. I think that old Euro games used auctions differently than they're used now, and they're much kinder now overall, which I dislike if we're speaking broadly. An auction game I really want to try that I have not tried is Bausack. Do you know this one, Mark?
Yeah, I've never played it, but I know what you're talking about. Bausack.
Yes, Bausack is an auction game with dexterity where you're like bidding to get pieces. And I lovingly look at pictures of this on Board Game Geek all the time because I hear so many great things about it. And I like the idea of like bidding because you think or don't think you can place a piece. Like there's something really funny about that. Like betting on your own manual dexterity is hilarious to me.
I don't have anything like substance to say about it, but I think one of the games that heavily featured auctions that took me by surprise recently was Fresh Fish, which combines a auction on stalls as part of your position in like sort of an abstract route building game. I just thought that was a very, very smart way to handle it. It felt like, I think that is the perfect fit for, again, to allude to something we were talking about earlier, to work an auction into a game where the whole premise is how far are you willing to go? How much are you willing to spend of a very limited pool of money that you don't get back in the case of Fresh Fish in order to optimize your routes? And I thought that was really smart.
Yeah, Fresh Fish is another amazing one. I love Fresh Fish.
On Board Game Geek, Cosmic Encounter is listed as an auction game. The hell are they talking about?
Yeah, I don't see that.
Actually, Neelan, it's an auction game because you bid on the amount of ships that you want to contribute into a conflict.
Bid though, that's weird.
Actually, Neelan, it does because it's on Board Game Geek.
Actually, Callan, let's wrap this up by we've been talking a lot about spectrums, but I think we can all agree that a 10 on every spectrum is only one game.
Mark, I'm
king of the fillers.
This is your time to shine.
King of the auction games. Biblios.
There it is.
Let's shout it from the rooftops. Biblios.
No, wait. Okay. But we got to wrap the episode, right? Because you can't. No, he said it so many times. There's no reason for him to do it.
I think that, look,
just
if we had an
this is
episode.
giving people what they want. You don't think people want to
If
hear
we
that?
had an episode where Mark had all the right in the world to wax lyrical about
this is the one.
The best bird game, I'll even go with you on this, Mark. Monks are the most
okay. Well, there you go.
people.
Okay,
you're gonna look dumb, Mark.
Yeah, monks are the birds of people, as I've said.
Look
and
dumb.
So that makes Biblios.
Oh my God! God.
What the? Kellen is having like a.
Why?
I don't know.
Did you not listen to me?
My day, Mark.
All you
I
had
didn't
to
realize
do.
you're such a bibliophile.
Close the episode. Turn it off.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find us on all forms of social media. Leave us a review. You can leave us a review at Apple Podcasts, wherever you find us. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. You know where to find us. Join our Discord. You want to talk to a bunch of awesome people? They're available at the Discord at BoardGameBarrage.com/Discord. We are cooking up our next math trade. The people there are just insatiable for math trades. So I think we've got one probably going the next couple weeks. Thank you as always to Heart Society for our intro and outro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid? And that'll do it. Till next week. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, we'll hash it out.
All about auctions?
Are
like
you
the alliteration.
kidding me?
Talk
Yeah.
me,
Wait,
talk me
why
through
did-
how good this title is.
Okay, we got a 3, 2. What do you mean 3, 2, 1, bro? Are you recording?
Yes.
3, 2, 1.
I don't know why I'm clapping when I just said I didn't start recording yet. Sorry, we'll have to redo that again. Although, yeah, half the time I do actually forget to record. That's not true.
What?
I've now done it twice, though, for what it's worth.
I've left it up all week.
I've done that once as well.
Oh, I've done it for days, but never a week.
Okay, ready to clap.
3, 2, 1.
Excellent. That's professional style.
So, just before we start, non-negotiable, the episode shall be called All About Auctions.
I don't think. I don't. Why are you so excited about that name?
Why?
So, many people don't know is that there is an eternal struggle between Neelan and I, where he wants to name everything with artistic and I want to name things functionally so people could maybe understand what the episode's about and for SEO purposes. And so
You like your titles like you like your flavor text, like non-existent and just plain. Episode 1.
okay. You're quoting me from a time when I was not there, first of all, so that's rude. And second of all, so the convergence, right, of your artistic
Yeah.
and my SEO.
Got
with
it.
the triple
Is a
A,
terrible title.
all about auctions. Do you
Triple A. Okay, Triple A. I'm starting to see more of where you're going here.
This episode has been in the womb, in utero. No,
Why didn't
in the
you say
uterus.
works? Just say in the works. Why didn't
Since
you-
episode 19. So this baby's been cooking for 2 years.
It's been gestating longer than a human child would.
That's right. It's time.
How about we just
There
call
is no way that the episode is going to be called All About Auctions.
Yeah, it's going to be
You
called.
don't have that
it's going to
power.
be called.
You
I
don't
do
have that power. No, you don't.
Yes, I do. I am the
Why
one
do
that
you have
names
that
the
power?
episodes.
It's
Who
going to
gave
be
you that
called.
power?
This episode has gestated longer than a human child. Done. Let's do it.